Which one?
In the systems thinking. So chapter 4, you start to cover, the resilience, the self-organizing behavior, the hierarchies, and that's what we're starting to touch on here. How did chapter 5 make you feel? Don't go read it right now.
It's just the traps, or,
Yeah.
what?
I don't know, as someone who's trying, any other comments? So you're looking at a simple system here, right? And you're looking at it and saying, how do I get my head around it? What are the piece parts? How do I tie it all together and analyze it? And we're trying to get you to think through systems. If you read chapter 5, you ought to start, for me, I'm starting to think, oh my gosh, where do I focus? It gets into things that are beyond the system you've defined and how it affects your system and how much should I model and am I measuring the right thing. That is sort of a little uncomfortable because you're trying to say, okay, if I'm going to go do this, where do I start? How do I do something? And it's very real and it's something you're going to have to deal with, but a lot of it comes back to perspective. Okay, so I'm going to depart from what the Y12 RNL for a little bit today. May come back to that at the end with because I'd like to talk to you about your systems that you're thinking about. But I'm going to pick on Bobby here for a minute, and then I'm going to ask you all the same question. Is you do prevention for fires, fire protection, fire system, safety systems, that sort of thing. So from your perspective, is fire good or bad?
Fire is bad. We want to prevent fire.
Right. So in general, is fire good or bad?
It has useful purposes. It can give you a job. Generates energy. It gives me a job. There are good purposes.
Good purposes of fire. Is good or bad? Show of hands. Good or bad? Good.
Controlled, it's good.
Controlled is good.
It's a stop.
Remember that.
Yeah.
Controlled is good.
Right.
Controlled is good. Everybody thinks controlled is good, right? Okay. Anybody think it's bad?
It's uncontrolled.
All right. I'm going to ask you the same question at the end here.
Uncontrolled.
Okay.
Fire, bad.
Fire is bad. Fire is good. I think it's perspective. Okay. And when you're thinking about a system that goes uncontrollable and causes fire, that can be bad, right? So remember that.
A system that one part of
All
here.
right. So I want to talk today about some natural systems and human systems related to natural systems. So as I'm reading chapter 5, they were talking about the grubworm or something, and the story goes that the lumber industry likes a certain kind of tree. I think it was a pine, and then after the pine, the most valuable is a spruce and then a fir. And they have this problem that every so often, every 6 or 7 or 8 years, this worm emerges and just destroys the forest from the firs, I think is what they get into. And so they went into a management system of saying, okay, we're going to basically kill all these grubworms. And so they started doing all kinds of insecticides. People would complain about DDT. And then when that became effective and it got outlawed, then they got into all these different kinds of poisons. And what happened was, it's just a booming of this worm that's just killing the trees, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so another point of chapter 5 is nonlinear effects. You think you got the system handled up here, and you think more is better or less is better depending on what you're trying to do, but the system probably will be nonlinear, and there could be different complicating effects such that when you go in one direction, it actually makes it worse. Okay? Keep that in mind. So a long time ago in my career, I had a chance to work with the Forest Service. Anybody ever been up to Missoula, Montana? Montana? You been there? Been there? There's a fire science lab there, right just north of the airport, where they study fire, the science of fire. Right next to it is the Smoke Jumpers Training Center. Okay, and what they do there is they study how does fire burn, from what kinds of fuel, okay? And they build these models, and they really study and try to figure out how to do fire prevention, right? Because fire prevention is a good thing. And then, of course, they have all different ways they look at it. They look at wildfire from, you know, what do they need to do for their actual parks? What do you need to do for urban areas? What do you do at the boundaries? And they do their own modeling and simulation. I don't think they call it quite what we do about stock, but the stock that they think about are the fire. Well, there's several stocks. Fuel load, you know. In fact, when I was there, the reason I was there was we were looking at could we use remote sensing to help them in some of their basic modeling. Okay, the way they did it was they get all these graduate students or students in the summer, and they give them a booklet, and it would be a booklet for this type of an area, and in the booklet would be pictures of grasses and limbs and logs and these kind of things, and they're all these different classes. They would send them out in the field. Hopefully they figure out where they are, and they look around and say, I think about 30% of this is this kind of fuel load, and 20% is it, and they mark it down. They'd come back and they build a geographic model of the fuel load. And they had all the different effects that they were trying to model of wind, and terrain, and all these other elements of their system, okay? Because they wanted to be able to say, okay, can I predict where our fire is going to occur? Or how's it going to burn? And what does that mean for fire prevention? Right? They thought about the interconnections. For instance, in terrain, if it's a steep slope and wind, it'll burn very fast uphill. And then in other conditions, it burns slower. So they were trying to get a very accurate model of how fire would occur in a certain area if it did occur, and what's the likelihood of it occurring. And so we were looking at, hey, can we take a special satellite image and modify it, and it gives them better information. So that's why I was there. And I learned a heck of a lot just from talking to them that was interesting. One of the things they did was they worked with other agencies in other parts of the country. And probably most of you know, in the fall in California, what happens? Fire. Right?
Washington State.
Yeah, in Washington State. And why is that?
They're not getting enough of the rain, of the snow pack. That's where they get the moisture.
So in their model, climate and moisture content makes a big difference. I learned when I was there, you know, the Santa Ana winds, you know, the winds come across, it's a geographic thing between the mountains and the body of the water and the dryness and the climate. The wind comes through, and that makes a big difference in that fire. I learned that they started saying, okay, what are the things we can measure in this system that's going to tell me if fire is going to occur and how bad is it going to occur and what I need to do. And one of the things I learned was moisture content. The moisture, they go out and measure the moisture content in the leaves of the brush at the time, because they determined that that moisture threshold was below a certain amount. You could take a blowtorch to it and it wouldn't keep going. I mean above that amount. If it went below that amount, it was like a tipping point, and the fire would burn faster than you could run. Okay? So fire's a bad thing, right? Right. So the system is a model of wherever they're interested, right? And you've got elements of terrain and man-made things, roads and buildings, and they're interrelated geographically. And you have all the other interconnections of wind and climate and this sort of thing. So what happens when there's a fire? Let's say a wildfire. They go off and they self-organize. It's very efficient. They have what I call a 911 of 911s out there in Riverside, California. It's sort of a central station where if there's a fire, because it's going to burn every year, right? They call in all the other agencies. They'll call the Missoula, Montana smoke jumpers. They'll borrow equipment, logistics of aircraft to come and dump water, smoke jumpers to come in and start to make fire breaks. They do all kinds of things to suppress the fire and respond to it. So it's a system that has built in all these self-organizing hierarchies that occur when they need it to, right? So that's the man-made system of trying to manage the fire. It's getting resilient, right? So I think I'm older than most people here.
Do they actually consider the fact that us controlling the fires is making it worse?
Yeah.
Because we're not allowing nature to burn down like it should.
Good question. Okay, when I grew up, it wasn't in Tennessee, but when I grew up, the television commercials I would see as a kid were Smokey Bear. What was the phrase they would say? Only you can prevent forest fires, right? Only you can prevent forest fires. I have a picture. Did you manage to get it up
Yeah,
here?
you can just,
It's a little granulated here. I don't know. We had a little trouble getting it to show up.
We can turn some of the lights off if you want.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. Let me bring it up here and I'll pass it around and let some people look at it here. Here's a picture, and there was actually a better one I saw from the guys at in Missoula. But this is an example. This is a picture of a cabin, a before and after, same cabin, once in 1915 and once in 2002. So about 80, 85, 87 years.
That was constructed pretty well. wasn't
It was constructed pretty well. Amazing, you get a picture that you can compare like that, right? Take a look at that. What are the differences you're seeing?
it? Trees, it's a lot more dense. 2002. And you can't even see the sky, or you can't see through the trees at all.
Can't see it, right? And there's a lot more they call it understory, you know, all this other stuff that goes up here. So the requirement that they had, they were trying to satisfy was what?
No forest fire.
Force keeps the fires.
That was their, no forest fire was a requirement, right?
Right.
And because they wanted to protect man-made areas, fire's bad, right? They wanted to do that, because you are trying to protect humans, right? And things of that nature, right? So we're having this fire prevention. We're seeing, you know, things of this thing occurring. They told me at the time that, you know, back when, you know, the country was first settled, the forests that we had were like that. They were park-like, they said. You was actually walk through the park, trees here and there, nice, beautiful kinds of things. Now it's heavily wooded, right? Okay. How many of you have ever been to Yellowstone National Park? Most of you, right? Did you ever see any of the effects of fire there? I've got all my details on the iPad, but in 1988, there was a forest fire. It started from small fires that converged at Yellowstone. It burned for months. Hundreds of thousands of firefighters involved, equipment, just huge, huge amounts of response. They went on a policy after that of letting fires occur and die out naturally. And so they would try to not protect, you know, it's pretty sparsely populated, but they try their best not to protect it, and now it's becoming a lot more park-like the way that's good. And one of the reasons for that is fire is a part of a system in nature that nature, the ecosystem, has built into how it works. And so they told me there's actually species of trees that do not germinate unless there's a fire. Drops a cone, it will not open until the fire is at a certain thing. What happens is when you build this up right here, the fuel load is so much that the fire burns hot and would burn up the cones. There's actually several feet of, I think they call that organic duff, that sort of is at the forest floor. If it burns hot enough, it burns down and burns that up. all of a sudden it makes it harder to rejuvenate. Try good or bad.
So reinforcing the
Reinforcing it, depends on your perspective. So you model the system, said my requirements are to protect human nature and respect humans and property, protect them. And so you built up this thing. You let humans evolve and go build into places where now it becomes harder and harder to control some natural systems. If you're in California, where do you build a house? Where's the best place to go build a house? If you're not on the beach,
On a cliff.
on a cliff, right on that, and those beautiful trees. Wouldn't you like those trees right nearby, right? And so, from a fire modeling sense, that's pretty dangerous, right? So, they start to reorganize, relook at how they manage things, and they'll start to do prescribed burns, which I think Los Alamos had to they start to do management policies of not letting people build in certain areas, these kinds of things. So it's fire good or bad?
Good.
Depends on your perspective, right?
So that would be self-organizing.
Right, right. So I learned another thing there. How many of you, I'll tell you, I personally believe in global warming. Maybe people don't here, or the whole debate about man-made versus natural. So in chapter 5, they talk about you have your nice system and whatever loops you have back and forth, and they have these clouds here. And that's where they start to say, get me uncomfortable, say, well, what's happening in this cloud here? Okay, in this case, they modeled a system whose purpose was to protect man-made structures and people, and things like lightning and things that were actually causes of natural fires started to become something they needed to reuse and reintroduce into this because their requirements changed. So one thing I learned this that you don't normally hear, that a forest fire actually is one of the largest contributors of carbon into the atmosphere. I think it's about equal to automobiles, which they now say is like the #1 cause, right? So you can ask yourself, is wildfire and carbon into the atmosphere from forest fires man-made or not?
Well, is man
happening
causing the
before man.
fires?
well, we're
You're
making
going
it
to
worse.
build up, and then you have a fire, it's a little worse. Now you have this larger disturbance over a longer period of time versus the little shorter ones that happen, right? So a lot of it's about perspective, right? So even if you have requirements set and you figured out your purpose and you design your system and you self-organize on the fly when you need to and you manage it, there are unintended consequences from these other systems. And so chapter 5 is a scary chapter to me as a systems engineer. What the heck do I model? What is my purpose? And what are the things that I can't control outside of this? And all I can say is that as a society, we learn as we go and we have to adapt. So you can basically optimize for whatever your system is here. And you can go well, but you may, for some time, but you may learn that there are other things you did not understand because you weren't looking at them that you need to consider as your requirements change. Fire good or bad? Don't know. Depends. What's your perspective? If you're in this system, you're trying to protect that.
Really responsible for global warming.
Okay. Question?
Logging was another thing that affected or made a positive reinforcement because once we decreased our logging, then we had the overgrowth of the trees and
That's
also
right.
of the trees that were spreading disease.
Right. Okay. One of the things that they were concerned, you just reminded me of, that they were concerned about at the time was logging roads. When you have a contiguous area of forest land that behaves in a certain way, once you start to put a road in and you cut, it starts to introduce all kinds of disturbances in the ways that fire can happen differently because of the boundaries. unintended consequences. So chapter 5 is scary. Now I wanted to shift just a little bit. You have been looking at your own systems and thinking about your own systems. I know you did a QFD on it. Have you started to think about self-organizing, resilience, hierarchy relative to that system? Anyone? You have a system, you modeled out the QFD, you think what's the important pieces. Ask yourself if there's a stressor to the system. That's what you really study, right? If there's a something that's happened that the system has to respond to, is your system resilient? Any thoughts? Have you thought about it yet? How do you analyze it?
Well, I think kind of indirectly. I mean, I know the book points out when we're talking about resilience, kind of the opposite of that is being rigid. And I do think we have very rigid systems out at the plant. I sat down with the maintenance folks this week about this and started talking with more people in their organization because it's their procedures that got us, and that's what I think makes things rigid. We've got a lot of organizations that do different things at our plant, so we make these procedures to try and fit as much inside of that box as we can, but I'm not building, working with materials that are hazardous. I'm working with a fire system. So I'm trying to find ways to satisfy them and make them understand that we're working in a safe manner. We don't have hazardous energy sources other than the electric current that runs through our alarm systems and the water that runs through our pipes, which is rarely higher than 100 psi. So trying to get some resilience or some bounce back in there.
And so what are you doing there? What you're doing is you're starting to talk about requirements and how your system operates. What are the boundaries of your system versus other systems? That's what you got to do. You got to start to understand what's in the cloud. What are you tied to that affects you? And then start to work out those agreements and document them such that you can have maybe a tailored process, a different category of activity. Those are the kinds of agreements you have to do in this family of systems. Right? And so what happens right now, you said it's kind of rigid, so if something happens where you need to respond, are you able to respond?
To certain things, yes. I mean, if a head is fused and water's flowing, yes, we can respond to that very quickly. But there are other things, and I'm sure they're sick of it, but I had my bathtub model up there, and I put a presentation together and showing them. There are some things that we'll notice during just regular preventive maintenance activities. You notice something's wrong. And the structure, the rigidity, I guess the way to say it, of the system says when I notice that thing, I've got to put in a service notification. They've got to plan it. They've got to walk it down. And it's a very simple thing, and I've got all the resources right there to fix it right then. And I think I could easily show that we're doing more harm than good by not fixing it right then. But that's what I'm trying to
Right. Okay, that's good.
build into.
That's very good, actually. You're starting to say here, these loops, every loop is a delay. Those delays affect how work gets done, right?
So what I tried to show them is we looked at how many service notifications come in per month versus how many our crew are able to close, and I'm showing a net increase every month. My point being, if I can take care of those jobs when they're recognized in the field, they never come into my stock of maintenance backlog, and essentially I can beat that backlog number down more effectively.
So when you have to go beat the backlog down, what do? You call in more people? You self-organize in any
Well,
way?
That's, in the past, they've thrown more resources at it, and that's worked, but I don't think in this environment there's anyone standing at our door saying, here, we're gonna give you more people. So my point's been, we've gotta be more effective and efficient with the people that we've got, because we're not going to receive additional resources to get it done.
I think that's exactly the point. How many people, wherever you work, watch well or now, when something happens, do they say, hey, let's go fix it and redesign our system, or throw bodies and money at it?
That's
No
the
reason.
Yeah.
It's the bodies and money, right? Because you gotta get the product out the door, get back up and running. If there's an issue, you gotta resolve it so it can work effectively. And what's the answer we typically have? If there's something we're gonna go do that in response, so it never happens again?
Yeah, change of procedures.
We add more to our procedures, right? Which makes them more complex and rigid. And we're very much an expert-driven company, as much as we want to think otherwise. So as we build our systems more, I mean, we had fun just doing this one conveyor belt system this morning, right? So now, you make the system more and more complicated. It makes it harder and harder to understand, whatever your perspective is. And so, more complex is not necessarily better. It makes it actually, I think, more rigid, more fragile. Anybody else looked at their system yet from that perspective of resilience, self-organized?
You want to know something that kind of goes along with that as well as yours? We've reintroduced what's called model jobs to try to get us out of that whole planning process every time the same job comes around. So we brought in a subcontractor, Jane, who used to be an employee, now she's a sub, got that working really well and actually made a huge increase in getting jobs done quickly and efficiently. And they just released her because she's a subcontractor. Right. So, we did something good and identified it, and people knew it, but she wasn't kept. And, because of our rigid system that we have in place. And that's a good example right there, because we did something, and last year things been moving great. You ask her to do something, it's done like that day or that week.
So this is something that I've heard over and over again at Y12 and Pantex, and I think it would be true at just about any corporate America, is we are thinking in terms of ethics, right? So another part of chapter 5 was when you're trying to figure out what to measure and what to use, a rule of thumb is sort of like what you're being affected of the same frequency. So if there's something that's really long-term, probably not going to have as much effect of what you're particularly trying to look at, or too short. So, but just a rule of thumb. So when we think about ethics in the business world, we tend to think of either tactics or strategy. What I got to do to get the product out the door today, meet my goals, versus where am I headed 10 years from now, 20 years from now, okay? So as you become higher up in the company, bigger leaders, you're going to have to think about that balance, because your system, sooner or later, is going to degrade. There's going to be some change in the requirements. Fire is bad, fire is good. It's going to change. And that's going to change how you're going to have to operate. And you're going to have to figure out, how do I go from getting widgets out the door to the new model? 2 points. This morning, before everybody got here, we were talking about budgets, annual budgets, and what happens. And you were sharing some examples. I shared some examples about, typically on a budget model, you come to the end of the year, you got to spend the money, right? So as I was a graduate student, my professor said, taught me, first budgetary lesson I ever had was, university got a contract, we're working for the Air Force, university takes off half the budget, the other half comes to the department, they take off half the budget, then it comes down to the professor, and you have the graduate students. And came to the end of the year, and he says, oh, I didn't know anything about this. He said, all the graduate students were all going to the bookstore. We're going to buy every supply, every book, everything we can think of, because he had money to spend, right? So often I've heard this at 12, I've heard it elsewhere. We think about efficiencies, getting more efficient, and a lot of times the things you want to do about improving the system, even if you have a great idea, takes resources, because you're now saying, I want to go from the tactical to the strategic. Right? And often, unfortunately, if you're not continually think about the balance, you get the emphasis on the tactical, okay, at the expense of the strategic. Or even the tactical may not, is back to perspective. So I've heard this before, if you spend your money in a year, you get the widgets out the door, and you talk, and as a provider here of capability, you're starting to talk about, I need more money for efficiencies. And they're saying, wait a second, we gave you this amount of money, you got the same widgets out the door, why do you need more money for something? Should be able to turn the crank again. What's the other mantra I've heard at Rockwell and in DOE in general? Run to failure, right? Okay. So what we do often, I think, is we comply with the law and the requirements. And the requirements may say do this certain amounts of things in order to produce those widgets. You have to get out the door at the expense of either strategic or things that we sort of put on the shelf and say, hey, there's some things we're going to get to down the road when we have more money. And then you have the budgetary cycle comes around. What do you mean? You need more money. It's the same amount of money. You got the widgets out the door. Why do you need more money? So another thing that in simple processes and systems you need to look at is start to think about backlog. What is backlog? How much, you talked about how much inventory you have there. How much backlog do we have to work on? And that's something we need to be thinking more of when we look at our systems and how we do production at both plants, to be honest, is we know what we need to do. If you go talk to the engineers, the maintenance, operations, they say, hey, I need to go fix this thing's not right, you know, what have you, much less all the strategy stuff. We have to become more articulate and more analytical and more deliberate in how we show these things to our customers who set the requirements of the budgets. Okay? So you as systems engineers and as future leaders, when you get in there, you need to keep all that stuff in mind and help articulate the story of how we have to migrate so that we don't have these surprises down the road. Any other systems that people have been looking at?
I have a question about his, when he said it was working when they had the subcontractor and then they had to get rid of the subcontractor, quit working. That's an example of the system not being resilient? I mean, is that,
Is it?
that's
Well-
my question.
She set up something that worked well, and she's not gonna be there to maintain it.
Is she the only person who
We
can do
go
it?
back to expert phase.
But there was no way to self-organize to account for that person leaving and to continue on. Do what?
She's not as experienced, so it's expert phase.
I can't hear you. Do
There's,
what?
there's another person in
Oh.
the role to do that now,
Okay,
but she's not an expert in making these jobs or making these models, because she's come from a different role. So she doesn't have the experience that the one that's leaving has. So
Or maybe even
when
drive.
it's expert based, right, that's like all of our systems out
It's
at
the-
Well, is
We try, we
We'll have a
really
hiccup.
try hard to make it not expert-based. I mean, we have the detailed procedures, we want to be able to grow new people into them, we want to be able to have them trained and be able to execute as if they're interchangeable. I mean, because that, if you have that way, then you have better assurance that the product is going to get produced, it's safe, all those kinds of things. But we're all people, right? The more complex we make it, the harder it is to be not expert-based, to be honest. You know?
So why don't we admit that? I mean, if you ask people out there, they will tell you that, you know, like we try to convince ourselves that we are not expert-based. We've got these complex procedures that govern it, but it seems to me we need to call it is what it is and try to design it that way.
So I will tell you, what I'm saying in this class is not new. The things I say here, I've said since I've been here. And when I get, whether it's a new employee that's just learning it, or a long-time employee, a manager, you have the conversation and they nod their heads and say, yep, we are. I mean, so it's a sort of it's a truth everyone knows. I mean, if you've lived it, you know it, right? You know, if I have a problem, I'm going to call her, I'm going to call him, because you've been doing it for 25, 30 years, you know how to get it done right? You have an issue, and you have two different groups that are pretty similar. One group, well, they've been our three, they never have this problem, right? Because they always do it perfectly. I've heard that before. I think you're right. I think we just gotta be open and honest and say, you know what, here's what we have today. Here's how we work. And then bring in some of the concepts you know in here and say, how do we analyze this so that we're a little less expert-based? We want those experts. We want to transfer, that's another thing everybody's worried about, right? People retire, how do we replace our experts? Knowledge preservation. Did I hear a question?
I know I've talked with folks in my group about it. We're not only responsible for the equipment, but I'm also responsible for the procedures that govern those. And I have talked with the guy that runs the procedures essentially for me. And, you know, we need to give these guys some confidence that we trust them to make these decisions out there. They're not building hazardous things. We trust their knowledge.
Trust their knowledge and their judgment.
And their expertise.
So it's back to balance.
Right.
Okay.
You gotta find that balance between training and procedures and
So exactly, so what I'd hear before is, well, it used to be, back in the day,
Right.
you know, we had these experts and they can go do this thing, and something happened. And so to fix it, we became more complex procedure on top of procedure. Now you have a planner that has to go do this, and so we fix it. We're trying to do the right thing, but we made it more complex, more loops for you, more delays, and so you have to start saying, what is the balance between this requirement and the other requirements? And am I really being effective? We're getting the non-linearities. I think a little bit more of this will.
The clouds start piling on top of you and you have no idea where you're going.
That's right. That's right. So,
and I mean, you're in a loop that you can never get out of. If the answer is, okay, I can trust these people to do their job if they have training. Oh, wait a minute, I don't have time to send them to recordable, a week's worth of training off-site or bring in a vendor because that week puts me so far behind on something that I'm already so far behind because of the way the system's designed right now.
So how many times have you seen somebody draw a flow chart, a picture of the system or process?
I mean, other than doing it through this class, I've never seen someone.
How many procedures do we have at Watchville?
No.
Pantex is more. Okay. And every procedure, when there's a change, goes all around. And we're trying to do that for the right reason, right? Because we're primarily a human-based system. Well, yeah, we have the chemical processes, but we're primarily human-based. And so we need this kind of thinking and this kind of language and discussion so people can really understand the as-is, where we really are. So we can look and say, okay, logically, analytically, why would we do something a little different? You know, instead of just go add more to the process on top of it, how do we simplify? How do we measure what really matters? You work at Oregon, so how's it over there?
Largely the same.
Largely the same?
Metrics.
You have a lot of
Performance aren't really
procedures?
associated with what it means to be successful.
I would say in our specific area, at the instruments at Spallation Neutron Source, I would actually say we don't have enough guidelines or enough written down procedures. And there's a difference between the operating procedural manuals, the OPMs, and the guides that people actually use. And that's how we're trying to carry on that knowledge, is through the guides that people actually use that can change with the system.
It's still largely effort-based.
Good. Good. So no place is perfect, right? Okay, I'll give you two other examples. When I went to one company, I actually worked at a startup for about 4 years. And the thing that they had was they said, hey, you know what? We don't need no stinking processes and procedures, you know? And my manager, after I'd been there a while, said, it was a small business, like 200 people, said, the CEO wants to know, what should we do different? And it was trying to ask, you know, a lower level down, what are you doing? So I wrote her a story, and I said, okay, I just got married, just gone to the Mediterranean, and we did the cruises, so it was on the mind. So I said, imagine you're the Queen of Spain in the Middle Ages. You decide that international trade is a very good thing. And you decide you want to go to the different countries and really have a ship that goes and does this. And so the analogy was we had a commercial satellite, first ever, beautiful thing. You decided to build the best ship afloat. Okay? Nothing better. Then you decide you're going to launch. You're in the bay. And launch, you're ready to go, and you're not moving. You finally look around. Well, the sails are still furled. You've still got anchors. People are rowing this way and people are rowing that way. What happens? People make heroic effects. They jump overboard, they've got a rope in their mouth, and they're trying to pull it out, and you're stuck. And what I was trying to get across here was we did not have a plan for how to do what our vision was. I left that company and started at Lockheed, and I was doing an orientation. And Lockheed had just shut down a global telecom business. There were actually people that went out, they were coming back in. So I was in orientation with people that were familiar with what Lockheed had. And the instructor, the training instructor, and the people there were reminiscing, but the thing they were griping about was the bureaucracy, the processes, the procedures. And I was hearing a little bit what I hear here. I said, thank the Lord we have some. Talk about chaos when you have none. Okay, so it's got to be a balance. It's got to be what's the right level to do what we need to do effectively, and how do you analyze it and show the rationale for what you're doing. That's what we got to get into the way we think. If we don't do that, everybody just says, "Ah, you don't know. You know, we've always got the product out the door. Here's the amount of money." You know, you're not showing what these things are until there's something that happens over here or outside that we didn't expect. I'm not trying to paint doom and gloom. I really don't want to paint that. But we need this kind of thinking for everything we do.
I agree, I think we need to have that balance. I wasn't saying by any means that we don't need any procedures, but there's certainly some freedoms for them to use their knowledge to get things done and not get hung up on things that actually stop a job over something small and petty.
So to answer your question, I don't think it was resilient to not bring in the person who just developed this, you know, because now you've got to get somebody else trained. And I really question, will we go forth and do it? That's really even more fundamental to me, because I've seen a number of things they get done. I've heard about it, Paychecks, they'll do this wonderful thing, they'll set it on a shelf, you know, they'll get around to doing it. So we have to see the follow through on some of these things as well. All right, any last question?
Level system.
Okay. Any last question? So next Friday, there is the fall break, right?
And
Is that right?
yeah, next Friday's fall break.
Yes.
All right, thanks.